This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Cristina Ramirez. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You see the icon up this. There's listen on Newsly. That is just another podcast platform that we, because they're a sponsor, we have to mention. Use coupon code GHOST and you get 1 month free premium subscription on that platform. We will be on Newsly later today. And this is actually going to be episode 917 of the podcast. We've been on the air since 2016, and this is we're just been out there for a while. So we like to let people know that. And then also, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this topic here that we're bringing up right now is the focus of the episode, and it was there how to face challenges with confidence. And so maybe
Mhm.
we'll start with that. Thank you again for being on the podcast.
No, it's my pleasure to be here. It's one of my favorite topics, so I'm happy to talk about it.
So, how would you address that question from the beginning?
Oh, okay. So, I think the first thing to recognize is that everybody has challenges, right? And to think that we don't is to look at Instagram and think that that's reality. It's not. And maybe our brains understand that, but our souls, our hearts, our back, like whatever is thinking is like that's how my life should be. And when it doesn't look like that, we kind of get disappointed. So the first part of facing a challenge with confidence is understanding that challenges are just a part of life and it's not something to hide from or to avoid or to numb. I like to think that a challenge is just like flashing lights that's telling you, go over here to grow. Like, this is where the magic is. So, step number one is just embracing what I call discomfort, that challenge.
Well, I think
And
it, yeah,
no, go ahead.
go ahead.
N-
Well, I was going to say, being I'm a producer and I'm a musician and I'm a software designer. So, a lot of things in my life, it's a creative kind of process, whether it's like, software design is more logical, but
Mhm.
music is more like heart and mind, kind of together, soul. And what happens is like no matter what type of thing I'm creating, that you have like failures. There are issues where you're not perfect, right? Like when you're a musician, you're always gonna have potential where yeah you could have played something better, right?
Mhm.
But there are some situations where the happy accident or you did something a little off, right? You did it like a micro timing error, but it actually, when you look at the whole piece,
It
instead
looks
of trying to make it perfect, it actually sounds better. And there's tons of examples of music that
mhm.
are hits in the past. They have all kinds of micro timing errors or pitch errors or things that production people would say, well, we could have fixed that, but it actually sounds good because of the happy accidents.
That's a great um analogy also because sometimes people's like, "Oh, I love you in spite of blah blah blah," or "I like this, music in spite of it being so difficult." And I think it's the opposite. It's like, "I love you because of that, because of the imperfection. I love it because it's not perfect, like it's unique and it's different." So, and I think like the more we accept that for ourselves, thinking that there is no perfect and that and I also don't think that there's failure. Like, the only failure there is giving up
Yeah.
until, like, failure is just it's just that's not the way. So let me think of another way of doing it, or I'm not there yet. So my view on failure is that as long as you're still in the game, you're still learning and you're still growing and you still have that potential,
Well, the
right?
thing is, like, what's happened today with like digitized tools, like
Mhm.
musicians, like it's a curse and it's a blessing. So if you've got a digitized tool where you used to have a tape recorder,
Mhm.
it comes back and tells you, hey, you weren't perfect on your beats per minute. It
Yeah.
can actually show you like you're supposed to do 120 and here you're 116, you're 113, you're off all over the map. So
Mm.
suddenly you got the computer telling you that you're not perfect. where before you would have just listened and you say, well, that's good, it's not good. But now you actually can have the computer telling you, hey, you got micro timing errors.
Yeah, but the
And
thing
then
is, like,
people
you
would say,
get
oh, I got to fix them.
but that's the thing, like, you get to decide whether it's an error or an art, right?
Yeah.
I have 2 kids who are musicians as well, and so, those it's what you said, those mistakes sometimes turn out to be great, but what I like to tell people is, like, you have so much more control than you think, and you have
Hmm.
power because the computer might be telling you, like, you're off pitch or you're off beat, but the computer's not gonna change it for you unless you wanna change it.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
still in control. So it's still your decision, not the computer's decision.
That's true. I just think what happens is that there's a kind of a belief. Well, there's this thing going on where people feel like it has to be perfect. Right, and that it's kind of like a personal thing, but also people are hearing this stuff that's kind of not what it was, like back in the
Mhm.
60s and 70s, and so there's tends to be this people trying to make this antiseptic perfect thing, right? And because these big producers do it and it makes money, then suddenly
Mhm.
that's what people feel that they want to be what somebody else they want to do it somebody else they want to clone it
Right.
instead of embracing the individuality they they want it to be something else, and they think it's a failure to actually let it be. Where my whole thing is kind of like the Beatles, let it be.
Yeah. I've
You know,
I'm on your team, I and as someone who focuses on empowerment and in growth and in confidence, that's exactly where the confidence lies. Like confidence doesn't come from doing things that are easy. Confidence comes from facing a challenge and being able to overcome it, from looking at a computer that's telling you that you're off and having enough courage to say is like, but I like it off and I'm going to do it this way.
yeah,
That's confidence. But facing, so you're not going to get there if you always say is like, well, I need to do it how that person wants it or how that one person wants it or how the computer wants it. That's not going to give you confidence. That's just going to give you, you know, um, experience. But confidence comes from challenging yourself, from thinking is like, okay, I have this opportunity, like what do I want to do with it? And the harder it is, it sucks going through it, yes, but on the other side of it, there's going to be this feeling of like, oh my god, I did that. Like I did that.
yeah.
That's where,
But
that's a
yeah.
confidence that nobody can take away from you.
Well, I think it's like having to trust yourself because I've been around people that like they start and stop, start and stop, start and stop because they want to make it perfect. Where there's this thing like going with the flow, right? So sometimes you just have to let a piece go. Like I've been with writers, they'll say, "I'll just do kind of a jam. I'll just go and it's right." And then
Mhm.
later I'll go back and tighten it up. But there's some people they want as they're going through it, they got to go fix everything, and they keep on starting and stop and start and stop, and they kind of get out of their flow. And I mean, different people's approaches are different, but the whole idea is if you can't trust yourself, like you got to get to a point where you have the belief in yourself that you can have that complete thought without having to start and stop all the time because of the confidence issues or things that are
Mhm.
like somebody told you you'd never be good enough. That's a belief. It's not a truth.
A
And if
hundred
you
percent.
and if you keep on letting that like filter how you do everything, then you kind of show a lack of confidence and you don't have the kind of drive to get it done because you're scared. You have this fear.
Right. That's what I was going to say is like, like perfectionism. People, it's just fear, but people make it a positive. It's like, oh, I can't do it because, I care so much and I'm like so detail oriented that it has to be perfect. If not, I can't let it. I'm like, that's baloney, like that's not true. That's just you being afraid of putting yourself out there and of making a mistake. But and it's not even trusting yourself that you know how to do it or that you have the answer. Is just trusting the process that it's gonna be okay no matter what. You know,
Yeah,
when you're dealing with music, when you're dealing with health, okay, like you really hope your doctor has
yeah,
confidence in like the open heart
yeah.
procedure that you're gonna go
Certainly, he
through.
has to believe what he's doing. The surgeon.
Yeah, but for the majority of us, like we're not dealing with life or death. We're
Yeah,
dealing with an experience. And so, just you just have to trust that no matter what, there is another side to that experience, whether it's good or bad, but you'll learn from it. And so, you know, you don't have to know everything.
Yeah, yeah.
You just
It's
have
kind of like
to.
the unknown. I mean, the whole
Right.
idea, like if you think about a jazz band, like I like jazz
Mhm.
and like improvisational jazz, is you have a structure maybe, and maybe you don't even have it, but you go in with a group quartet and you have this idea, but you kind of go into chaos and you come back, you go into chaos, you come back. And it's this idea where you everybody kind of just lets it be, right?
Mhm.
And you kind of can rebound off of something that maybe is a little off, but you don't stop,
Right.
you still keep on going. And so how you recover from potentially like and I heard that there's a guy named Victor Wooden that's a bass player, and he said, "I'm going to have this master class and show you how to know bad notes.
Mm.
I can go through cross scales and have this rhythm, and I can make it work on notes people would say would be bad, but I say there are no bad notes." So
Mhm.
he was trying to have this master class to show young musicians that it's your intention that you can kind of recover from the so-called bad notes
Mhm.
and actually not, and then nobody even knows that you hit the wrong note because it's just how you handle it, how you recover from it, or how you progress from it.
Yeah. And it's like that, my belief is that it's like that with everything in life. There's, unless it's death or unless it's health, like you will bounce back from anything. Your ego might be hurt, your pride might be hurt, or you might think it's like, darn, like that performance wasn't the best performance I've ever had. But then you can go back and you can see, okay, so what happened that I kind of lost my track, and then for the next one, you can be better. So for kids, I work a lot with kids, and I have a program for kids where we teach confidence through running or growth mindset through running. And oh my god, I totally lost my train of thought. One of the things that we teach them is, they're you just have to try. Like they're if let's say that you race, right? And like you stay up the night before eating pizza until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you show up for a race at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to perform your best.
Yeah,
But you're going to learn that maybe you shouldn't do that next time.
yeah.
Right. And the other thing that we teach is that the one that you measure yourself against, because I think also this has a lot to do with confidence, how we compare ourselves to other people or to other things outside of us. Like you can train all darn day long and you can be like, okay, this year I'm going to go to this race and I'm going to win, and I'm going to come in first place. And you train and you train and you train and you show up the day of the race. You do not stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning eating pizza. You show up. If Usain Bolt shows up at that race, it
I'm
doesn't
like,
matter how much you trained, you're not winning,
yeah,
right? But that doesn't mean that you did something wrong or that like you should beat yourself up or oh my god, it's like you're not competing against him. You're competing against you.
yeah.
And that's also a really good frame in terms of confidence, that it's not out there. Confidence comes from overcoming your challenges in your way on your terms. And
Well, yeah, you have this concept called empowered by discomfort, which I think
mhm,
is kind of part of that. Is I
mhm,
think like anytime you're a creative person, you're gonna have this thing where you have to have a certain level of discomfort. Just a little bit. Okay,
I'm here.
we can
Yes,
let just
sorry.
a little bit. But but what I'm saying is like there's a certain level of discomfort in going into unforeseen ground or unknown ground. Like I'm a software developer, we design things that didn't exist,
Mhm,
and then people come back and say, "Well, how come we can't benchmark it? Because we never built it before."
mhm.
So like if
Yep.
we're going into an area that we don't have numbers on, so then we get management comes back and, "Well, how come you're not done?" Well, because we're doing something that we never did before, and we didn't actually estimate it right, and it takes longer to do it because we're going into unknown territory.
Yeah.
And the bosses don't like that because they're like, "Oh, we want to know what it could be." And I say, "Well, sometimes you don't know."
Exactly. And that's where the beauty is for me, right? Is the not knowing. But instead of judging it as something bad, like the boss is judging something bad, you can judge it as, okay, I don't know. I'm going where I haven't gone before. Like this is exciting. It's not difficult. And yeah, it's hard because your boss expects certain things, but you can only deliver other things. But at the end of the day, only you can control what your thoughts and your actions are going to be and what you can then tell your boss because of that discomfort. Does that make sense? But the joy of life is in discomfort. And I know it's very counterproductive, but again, like discomfort is just like I'm not feeling discomfort about, I don't know, my work today, right? So it's
Mhm.
not something I have to worry about. But if I am feeling a discomfort about my kid or about my health or about my this podcast or my internet connection, which keeps dropping apparently, like then that's the discomfort that's saying is like, hey, pay attention to me because there's something wrong here and it needs to be fixed.
Mhm.
So you need to have that discomfort in order to know where to grow, what to do next, what's the next step. Discomfort informs you, challenges inform you and help you grow.
Yeah, because there's like there's never like, I mean, from my experience in doing design work, like it's nothing's ever 100%, right? Like when we do,
Hmm.
you see this in software every day. You see updates coming to the
Hmm.
software on your phone, and like because we have to continually update it because we've gotten to this kind of continual update software design, right? It used to be that we would think something was done. But
Hmm.
what we found is the machinery changes, the phone changes. There's so many different variables that we couldn't predict everything. And so we fixed it and we just said, all right, it's okay. We accept there are going to be errors, there's going to be imperfection, and we fix it, ongoing fixes all the time. And it's
Right.
kind of like life. It's like you're continually getting version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, because you just have to keep on learning. Either we have lesson learned where we'll go and have a lesson of why did that not work? And we
Right.
don't beat ourselves up. We say, well, okay, we got to respond to it and we do something different. We'll handle it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like 2.0.
Exactly. But the thing is, like, you wouldn't know that you needed a 2.0 unless there was a challenge.
Yeah.
Because if it was fine and it didn't need to be upgraded, then whatever, it's done. But it's because there is a challenge that it forces you to get better, to be better, to get to that version 2.0. Otherwise, like you'll just stay in version 1.0 and it'll be good enough. But life in good enough is like people say, it's like, oh, I wish I had a gajillion billion dollars because then everything would be okay and I would be at peace and I wouldn't have to worry. Like you would be bored out of your mind, right?
You'll find other
Because
problems.
exactly. You would have the same type of problem, but just like now at the billion-dollar level, not at like the hundreds or the here that, the rest of us are in. So I think us as humans, we have this need for safety, and
Hmm.
it's very primal, but we also have this need for growth, which is also primal. And the conflict between them is this balance between, okay, challenge confidence, it's like I'm good, but now I have to get better. And but that's an
Yeah.
ever evolving thing. And again, like we have almost like sanitized what we think our life should be by looking at what perfect is outside of us, that then when we don't match that, we think there's something wrong, and there's nothing wrong. It's just that we have we stopped believing that a challenge or a discomfort was something positive, and we've labeled it as something to be avoided at all costs.
Well, sometimes you get the magic bullets. Like somebody said, well, I'm going to find my soulmate. That's going to fix me. Well, I'm going to
Yeah.
get married and that's going to be perfection, right? I'm going to get that house and then I'm going to be satisfied. I'm going to get that job. I'm going to be satisfied. And what happens is like, you get to that goal and then it's not exactly what you thought because you thought it was going to be a panacea for everything.
Hmm.
And I think that's what people think. They think, oh, this is going to complete me. And then you get there and it's not what you expect and you get disappointed and you're like, and some people wanna have something that's like, "Oh, I keep on going back to that same coffee shop every day, getting the same thing but like now it doesn't really help. I don't really feel excited about it anymore. Now it's like I just keep on getting that same latte every day, and like, well, maybe I should change it.
Yeah, no. And so another thing, and I wrote like an entire chapter on my book about this, is that there, like I'll be happy when, I have this much money in the bank, I have this relationship, I have this job. The when never gets here. Because as soon as you're close, the when changes. So for example, like in one of my businesses, I help women start their own business. And so I'll have somebody's like, oh my God, Christina, can you help me get a business that's going to give me $5,000 a month? Because can you believe that? Oh my God, like that would change my life. And, oh my God, it would be so amazing. So I'm like, yeah, sure. Like we do that every day, no problem, whatever. We start working with them and they're at 4 grand and they're like, oh my gosh, what if I made seven? Can you imagine seven? That would be, oh my God, can you help me get seven? Blah, 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 blah. Sure, okay, no problem. So now we're like at 6.5. And she's like, okay, if I make 8.8 a month, I'm gonna have a six-figure business. Can you believe that? Oh my God, can you help me? Yes. And then she works and works and works towards it. But the bigger your business is, the more challenges there are.
Yeah,
So now maybe she has to hire somebody. And so she struggles a little bit. And she's like, why? Why is life always so difficult? Why don't I ever get to, like, why am I always struggling? Like, dude, you wanted five,
yeah.
you're at seven trying to, like, it's not that your life is difficult. It's just like you forgot to celebrate the milestones that you hit along the way. And it's good that your goals are changing, right? Like it's good to be wanting more, but don't think that you're failing because you're not there. You're never going to get there because as soon as you're close, it's going to move.
Well,
So,
yeah, kind of question I always have is like, what is it that you're trying to buy?
right.
Like, what is it that money? Like, it could be that you actually don't need that cash to do what you want to do, right? Some
Right.
people always equate the money with the happiness, and it could be something that it doesn't actually cost money to make you happy, right?
Exactly.
It could be
So,
something that you don't have to hit that number. Maybe you have to do this in your life and adjust these things, and it will actually make you happier than the money, right?
a question, yeah,
And
a
and,
question.
and
I'm
people
sorry, go ahead.
don't think that. Yeah, people don't think about that.
No. And a great question to ask yourself is like, what do I think the having of this thing is going to give me? Right? So if it's the money, it's like, so what do I think I'm going to have because I have that money? What am I really looking for? So if you see past it, that's where the real, like what really is inside of you is like, what do I think that this relationship is going to give me? And when you ask that, it's a completely different answer than, oh, I just want a relationship because I want a partner. It's like, but what do you think that having a partner is going to mean in your life that you're missing right now that you think that that's going to complete? That's a better question.
Yeah, because some people think like they're gonna find a soulmate that's gonna solve something that's actually like if you don't address like your insecurity or your fear, your
Mhm.
so-called soulmate is not probably gonna get rid of your insecurity or your fear,
Mm,
right? You're probably gonna still bring that, and you thought that they were gonna actually magically just fit, just gonna go away. If you don't address kind of like what poets we look at this thing we call look in the looking glass and see that other you,
mhm.
which is just a component of you, and you don't challenge, you never really address what's going on with that other you. You try to bury it, and then poets and writers we try to get at like who is that,
Mhm.
and try to bring it into our work to kind of challenge like why do we have these insecurities, why do we have these fears, and we try to put it into our creative work and analyze it. But a lot of times people they bury it, don't vocalize it, don't actualize it, then think something else outside them is going to fix it.
Right. So that also has to do with confidence, right? And the confidence comes from, again, from doing these difficult things yourself and coming on the other side. Nobody's going to fix you. No amount of money is going to make you happy. It solves a lot of problems, right? Don't get me wrong, but it creates other ones. And it's not like money is good or money is bad. It's not a relationship is good, a relationship is bad. It's what you do with it or what it means to you that matters, and it
Mhm.
matters to you, not to anybody else.
But some people are looking for respect, and it doesn't necessarily mean that money's going to give you respect. right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So if you're doing things that don't, in the way you behave doesn't generate respect. Just because you have money doesn't mean people are you're gonna buy the respect, right?
Exactly.
So if you're gonna buy somebody's like feelings for you because you got money, or
Mhm.
you're gonna get to a certain level. Where some people might like we still not don't feel this guy's the new money. He's not old money. Doesn't matter how much he got. He's still not in that social class. He can't fix it, right? Because and so he thinks he's gonna fix it, and you're never gonna overcome that because that's that's their belief.
Mhm.
So how,
And yeah, beliefs are so important because beliefs are the gatekeepers. I call it like in this power sequence that I do. So beliefs are what is going to allow you to take a certain action, or it will stop you from taking a certain action. So if you believe that you are a good musician, then if that's your belief, then maybe you will go out and audition to like this amazing band, or you will go and, put money and create your own I'm old school. I don't even know what they're called nowadays, like EPs, LPs, whatever,
yeah, there's still
albums.
yeah.
Um, but if your belief is like, well, I'm not that great. I'm still learning. I'm not that great of a musician. Maybe you won't try out yet for that band because you're not there yet. Or maybe you won't bet on yourself and record your song because that belief isn't there to support you. So, if you want to gain confidence, one of the things you have to look at is like, well, what is it that you really believe? And then question it. Is it true? Is it helpful? And if it's not, a belief is just a story that you have thought over and over again and that you believe that is true, but that's all it is. And just because it's a story that you have repeated, you can create a new story and repeat that story instead. That's going to be more empowering and lead you to something new.
I think it's the kind of growth mindset versus kind of like this staying kind of treading water, because
Hmm.
some people have this thing where like I'm just kind of in the survival mode.
Right.
And, there's a lot of people that were like, the starving artists that were really like put themselves in a kind of precarious position, but they had this belief that if they kept on doing it, they would get it and they break through and they didn't, they're kind of really on the edge. And, whether you're comfortable being on the edge or not, but there's a certain point where like there is that discomfort,
Hmm.
right? There's a lot of great artists that they were living not as good as they ended up living because they believed in something, but it wasn't happening at the moment. And so if they were measuring it at that moment, they weren't hitting that goal,
Yeah.
but
But
they were
even
working toward the goal.
Yeah. But even the concept of a starving artist is also a belief,
Yeah.
right? Because who says that in order for you to be an artist, you have to be poor or you have to be
Well,
starving?
yeah, you don't have to.
Of
You,
course not. But it's a belief, and if that's a great belief to analyze, because if that's like your intrinsic belief, then it's almost, and you don't do this on purpose, of course, but like you will self-sabotage, because if somebody tells you is like, here, I'm gonna give you all of this, you're gonna be like, I don't deserve it because I have to be a starving artist, and this is not, this having of this is not going to equal the belief of who I think I need to be in order to be a good artist. So you will subconsciously not take that opportunity or sabotage it because it's not in line with your belief that in order for like artists should be starving. And
well, yeah. I mean,
you
there's
know,
people they think about like a sellout concept. Like some people
yes.
feel like you have to go through it like living in a one bedroom place and like living in the city and just to be close to the venue, and you got to And some people that's what they did, but
Hmm.
how you get there doesn't have to be the same way. And so, yeah, there's this kind of romanticism about that
Right.
with the musicians. They'll go point out certain people, and that's their history.
Right.
Doesn't mean it has to be yours. There are
But
different people that came from different places, and they were well off.
yeah.
And so it's like not everybody's position is the same. So it's like it's kind of which way you go. If you're looking at certain sectors like the blues, it's kind of like that in a lot of cases. But but other places it's not. So you don't have to like look at that as the overall qualification.
So a belief that is, that is held by multiple people is a culture, right? And so just because there is that belief, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be true. It's just a belief that a lot of people hold. And so you buy into it thinking that that's your truth as well. But what I want to empower anybody is to be like, but is it really true for me? So, yeah, so they might think I'm a sellout because I did this other thing. But if I'm not, like, if I don't have that belief, then what they think or don't think is not going to affect me in any way. That's their belief. That's that culture. But I get to choose whether I'm going to participate in it or not. And of course, it's hard, right? Like, if you are to be different, but I would rather be different and happy than being the same as everybody else and not living my truth or not being confident because I'm just like, well, I have to do this because this is what is expected. Like, I'm supposed to be a starving artist. So, of course, I'm going to be a starving artist because then I'm not good. Those are all beliefs, and we are
Yeah.
in control of those. We can change those if you want to grow and expand and, have the full experience that this life has to offer us.
Yeah, I think like fear is still a big part of it, because a lot of people, they have that belief, and the fear is like, oh, if I get the advantages, then I'm not going to be authentic, right?
Yeah.
So the suddenly like I'm not going to take advantage of somebody giving me something that I think I don't deserve because I'm supposed to like struggle through it.
Right. So, but there are tools to combat that, right? And because again, you are 100% in control of what you accept and don't accept as your truth or not truth. So, if you can use those tools and then get to like all the way to the bottom, be like, oh, I believe this because I'm afraid of being different. When we in our primal years or like we had to be the same. We had to live in community because like a person all by themselves is going to be eaten by, a tiger, whatever. So you needed to belong. But at the same time, you're still an individual and in control of your thoughts, of your words, and of your beliefs. So yes, it's hard and it's scary, but again, like it's a choice. And the more we start seeing it as a choice, then the more empowered we are to change that. And again, like I know that sometimes they're like, oh, but you're so harsh. It's like, but it's true, right? And it doesn't matter, like I grew up overseas. It doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are. Like we do have a lot of choice within the confines of wherever we are, but we still have a lot more power than we give ourselves the you know the that we allow ourselves to really push forward into our life.
Sometimes, we have some cultural limitations or like,
Yes.
limitations because of a spiritual belief that limits
Hmm.
what you could do. Like you could have a spiritual belief that says women can't do this, and then you
Exactly.
buy into it. And
Yep.
then it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it, but if you have that social mores controlling the whole community and they don't really, you have to get out of that community or you're kind of ostracized.
Right. But
You
so
have to
here's the
find a
thing.
place where you actually can be allowed
Right. So if you don't
to do it.
agree, like let's say that you're in this culture of, like women are subservient to men. Okay, just to give you an example, because there's a lot of really messed up beliefs out there, right? But let's say that you're in that world that believes that. And if you're feeling the discomfort with it, that's a challenge. And if it's a challenge, it's because it's time for you to address it and for you to rise up and be like, I either accept it and I'm just going to be this way and think this way, or I'm going to do something about it. But it's the discomfort that is going to push you to change. If you don't have discomfort, you'll be in that culture and you'll be fine. And maybe you're happy and that's whatever. Like, who am I to judge? Like, you do you.
Mhm.
But if you're feeling a challenge or if you're feeling uncomfortable with that, or if there's like something in it that's like, but I want this opportunity and I can't have it because they say women can't have it, That's the challenge that is going to fuel you to change and to grow. And when you do that, on the other side of that challenge is the confidence that if you were able to handle that, then what else can you handle?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you have, structural situations, being an African American, you could have
Hmm.
wanted to vote, but you
Hmm.
couldn't vote.
Okay.
There's nothing you could do because it was a structural, thing. You had segregation, you want to go in that store, you can't, right?
Right.
So there's certain things that you can't do because they're actual structural even if you wanted to,
But
you
that's
you
when you get
do
up
it.
and fight, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
like women,
yeah.
women couldn't vote either. And so but it's that, like, if you weren't angry about that injustice, then it wouldn't change. But it's that challenge, it's that anger, it's that, like, well, why can't I do that? The moment you think that, that's power, because that means you're about to do something that might be able to change that structure, right? Maybe it's
Mhm.
not next Tuesday, maybe it's not even in your lifetime, but because you decided that that was challenging and that was a discomfort, it made you do something about it.
Well, yeah, that's why you had, runaway slaves. That's why you
Mhm.
had people that went in onto the freedom trails and made an exodus from the south to the north through the Underground Railroad. There were people that took the risk of being a free slave,
Right.
and so they weren't. And there were people that the thing is, trying to understand the concept and the mindset where there are people that did not like what was going on the plantation, but they couldn't bring themselves to be that runaway slave.
Yes.
That didn't mean they really accepted it. They were just too scared to
Afraid.
take that action. They not that they didn't think it was they thought it was okay. They just didn't see a way to get out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I would be terrified too, I'm guessing, if I was in that position, right? But it's at the end, at the bottom, like, and I don't, like, it's like I try to think, like, I have felt so many times in my life where was completely powerless, right? When I'm just like, what the hell? But even in those situations, I had a choice of how to face that situation. Um, and there's this guy called Viktor Frankl. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't read
Oh
that.
my goodness, you should read his book. So he was a Jewish doctor, a psychiatrist in a concentration camp in Germany. And he wrote this book about how he handled that time period. And talk about powerlessness, right? Just like in slavery, like, I- you're a prisoner. Um, and he
Yeah.
realized that, like, he couldn't do anything about that, but he could do he they couldn't control his mind. They couldn't control his
Mhm.
thoughts. And
Yep.
that was where his power lay. So outside circumstances, I can't do anything about it, but I can control what I do with it. And maybe I'm too afraid to do something, but that's also my choice, right? Like, you get that power. And I'll give you another example. So my husband had cancer, and he asked to be taken off life support. And there was not one damn thing that I could do to not have it be this way. If I had a
Mhm.
choice, I would much rather him be alive than not. Like, it was the love of my life. But even in that moment, like, I held his hand as he took his last breath. And even at that moment, there was a little light inside of me that said, "Is like, you will be okay, because I get to define what's going to happen from here on out. I have no control over his choice, over his health, over his death, over what's my kids, and like all the things that were going to happen because of that. I can't control any of it, but I knew that I could control how I thought about it. And if I could control how I thought about it, then I could control my actions of how I was going to deal with it. So,
Yeah, I
and
think that comes to the idea of facing the challenge with confidence, and it is like there's a lot of writings. If you get into like the Harlem Renaissance, or you get into W.B. Du Bois, and a lot of the black thinkers during that
mhm,
slave time, they did use their mind and write about the perspective. And so you can fight in the same way that you're talking about how, during the concentration camp era, of the Holocaust, is like the people who fought with their mind, fought
Mhm.
with their intellectual thought or principles, and were able to kind of relay that after the fact. I think that's how you don't give up.
Mhm.
That you keep on fighting the fight. That you don't let somebody take that power because they can't control your thinking. Like
That's right.
you can't control your mindset. So people have these survivor tales or victim tales, but a lot of times, you know, there's a lot of strength in going through adversity. There's a
Mhm.
lot. I've talked to a lot of people who are coming out of like domestic violence situations and coming up with been on the podcast talking about how they look at it as an opportunity, like
Mhm.
after the fact, to relay us their challenge to help other women
Mhm.
because they went through that process and then they took it and actually owned it, and didn't get pushed down by feeling like embarrassed by it or being marginalized by it, but actually took power and actually took strength and actually it suddenly became very powerful
Yeah.
because they took that negativity and turned it into positivity.
Right. And again, it's like the events outside of you, it's very hard to control. But like you said, like it and like the premise for everything for me is like nobody can force you to think anything without your permission. Right? Nobody. And when I talk to kids, it's like as a parent, it drives me bananas. Like I can control what you eat, where you go to school, what clothes you wear, what birthday parties you attend to or don't attend to, but I cannot control what you think. That is ultimate power. And I think if more of us collectively harness that power, we will have more courage to to do the things that we might have to like that are tough, that are hard, but that are necessary to move us forward as individuals and as a society. Right. But it's hard, like discomfort is uncomfortable. Challenges are challenging. But if you start owning and taking control of your thoughts and framing it into this is a challenge and it sucks, but I'm going to harness it and I'm going to create something on the other side, like the your podcast guest who's a domestic violence victim, that's confidence, that's power. And we all have that. It doesn't, again, like it doesn't matter where in the world you live or how much money is in your, like, it doesn't matter. You have that power because you get to decide what to think and what you allow others to influence you or not. Some of us are victims of, brainwashing or cults, like people like
Mhm.
that. But deep, 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 deep down, when we allow ourselves to have access to reason, we're still in control of our thoughts.
Yeah, I think I've talked to a lot of people who've dealt with like kind of really kind of dangerous narcissistic personalities that are cultish, kind of controlling,
Hmm.
and have broken out of it. And it takes this. There's like a point where the person finally like has enough,
Mhm.
and they finally get the spark to take that action, like to leave the cult or to leave that narcissistic person
Mhm.
or to get out of that environment. And you never know. It's like it takes 5 years, it takes 20 years, it takes one day. It depends each individual that gets to that point. But when they get there, they discover wow, I actually do have power.
Mhm.
Every time I've talked to somebody, they've mentioned it's like, wow, and now I actually feel my power. I feel better because
Yeah.
sometimes people let things kind of take over, and maybe it's a comfort, but there's a discomfort in that comfort of not actually taking the action.
Exactly. So I think it's when when your comfort zone becomes too tight that you're going to feel that discomfort. And sometimes you feel comfortable in situations that are not good or healthy or safe. Ask any drug addict, right? But until you feel comfortable, but it's not good. So until there's some kind of a friction between your discomfort and where you are, you will not change. But that discomfort is uncomfortable and it's a challenge. So
Hmm.
that's when you have to rise up and face that challenge. And again, on the other side of that challenge, you're going to have confidence, because I bet you that those podcast guests that had to do those really difficult things, I'm sure they're pretty badass. Like, I'm sure that they're pretty, like,
Yeah.
amazing people to talk to. And,
Yeah.
because that experience made them that way. And like, wow, that's confidence right there.
Well, it's kind of like my stories. At age 27, I had a stage 3 cancer, a
Oh.
sarcoma on my
Mhm.
back. And before the cancer, I was not the kind of person that would be doing a podcast or going on a stage or doing anything like that.
Mm,
And so what happened is, after I beat cancer, I discovered that I had created all these ceilings for myself, and I was fearful of doing all these things. And because I kind of, when I beat the cancer, then I lost the fear because I beat cancer. So I like, my mindset was, if I can beat cancer, I can actually get on the mic. I can actually go and do my band. I can go and travel and live in Japan, things that I would have never done.
mm,
And so what happened to me, I had this kind of crucible moment where I discovered that, my mortality, and I survived. And I said, well, then I wasn't scared about certain things anymore. I would, probably scared about other things, but I purposely started to realize that I could actually make significant changes and do the things that I was the kind of had trepidation about.
yeah,
And then I found out I break through it, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. It wasn't as hard as I thought it was. It was hard, but not as hard as going through the cancer. So then I said,
exactly.
I can I can do
Yeah.
it.
Well, first, I'm very happy to hear that, you were able to beat cancer. And again, like, you don't choose to have cancer, but you can choose what to do with it after, right? Like that, to harness that, or not. Um, but you have the choice. And I feel like sometimes, and like, I feel powerless, like, the way that the world is nowadays, you're just like, well, we've got this problem and this problem and this and these people over there and that people over there, and it makes you feel like, what's the point, like, it's never going to change, it's always going to be the same, blah 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 blah. But that is not facing the challenge. That is not facing the discomfort, because it still makes me feel really uncomfortable. So if I honor that discomfort and I harness it, then I can actually be a part of a change versus just be like, ah, that's just the way it is, because it's just going to be uncomfortable for a really long time.
Well, I think it's like your point, like when I talk to people who are creative people, and they're kind of holding on to their best piece of work
Mm,
because they're scared that it's so different and no people aren't going to understand it. And as a producer, I find this all the time where I try to bring out who somebody is,
mm-hmm,
right? Instead of trying to have them mirror somebody else,
mm,
I try to have them do the best version of themselves.
yeah.
So I want them to show me the song that they don't want to show anybody,
Mm,
the song that they're scared to show anybody. I want you to show me that song, because that song is probably going to show me who you are as a musician. And then we can work on making that the best version of you by
mm-hmm,
not trying to turn it into somebody else, but actually, make the drums sound better, make your voice sound better, but not change who that what that is.
right.
Just make it better by processing it better or using different techniques to make it sound better, but it's still you.
Mm-hmm,
And I see what people tend to be scared of, that you, that kind of authentic version of themselves, because they don't know how people are going to take it. And it takes a lot to actually, and even artists that are established suddenly want to change that, what
mm,
people know about them. They suddenly want to do something that, well, now I'm not, it's not going to be a hit because
mm-hmm.
it's radically different. But you'll see artists that will do that. They could have just done the same thing, but they do something different and people don't like it. Well, but they feel better about it because it's
I
like,
was gonna say,
that was
but I
me.
was gonna say, like, yeah. So people don't like it, but what about the artist? Like, they're probably like, "Oh my God, I finally got that off my chest." Like,
Yeah.
I finally was able to do it. What other people think, that's, that's what other people think. I remember I wrote, so when I wrote my book, I start my book with like some very personal stories, and like, I did some things that I'm not very proud of, and they're embarrassing, but I'm like, but the book just came out of me like in 1 month. I just wrote the whole thing. And I did a Kickstarter, so I had the books and I was about to send them out. And I was like, "Oh my god, everybody that I know, because all my friends supported my Kickstarter, right?
Mm,
Um, they're gonna know this story, and this is a really embarrassing story." And I'm like, "What have I done?" And there was a part of me that wanted to hold back
yeah.
because I was embarrassed. And then I was like, wait a minute, like, A, that was 20 years ago, and I'm not that person
Mm,
anymore. And eventually, what I got to is like, if it helps one person out there be honest about their story, then it'll be worth it. And once I decided that and I shipped the books out, I wear that story with like a badge of honor. It's like, yeah, I survived that. What have you done? Like it's not embarrassing. It's my superpower.
right. That's what you see with a lot of creative people. I've talked to authors, film directors, musicians, poets, that it is hard when you first start to actually reveal that. Yeah,
Hmm.
that a lot of times that the artist will reveal something very personal and that could be very embarrassing. And they just like it's part of the nature of being an artist is you can pull those things and they can help people. Like
Hmm.
when you put those things out there that are so personal and you're kind of like, well, that's kind of like I'm so open to the world. And some people like they look at artists like, well, how can you do that?
Yeah.
But it's like that's the nature of kind of an authentic creator is there. It's not all fiction. Some of
Right.
it is actually the person's life is embedded in their work,
Yeah. Because
and that's what
if
it
you
is.
don't, right, if you don't share it, your authentic self as a creative person, I mean, I consider myself a creative person too, like if you don't share that with the world, that discomfort stays within you. And it's so much harder. Like I can't tell you how many people will write me and be like, thank you. Or like, I, like I would have never been able to receive that if I was so like caught up in like not sharing my true self. But that story has been in me with for 20 years, and like it's always wanted to come out, and it was just kind of waiting to find a place to do it, and
Mhm.
so I think artists are very vulnerable. Like, you create something that didn't exist before, like like you said, you create a song, a painting, a book, whatever. And you have to just have, like, you have to be content with your expression of it and that process was enough, regardless of what everybody else is going to think or do about it.
Yeah, because you can take it personal. I mean, initially when you first start doing it,
Hmm.
and if you get a bad review from a
Yeah.
from a critic, right, from an art critic or music
Hurts.
critic, and it hurt because you put this honest thing out, and then they kind of like fluff it off, and they don't understand the context fully, and it's like, oh, fine, it's like that's their opinion, but there's
Right.
always somebody else that has a different opinion. So the whole point is like anytime you put a piece of art, there's going to be the people that love it and the people that hate it, and things get kind of analyzed. And I always find it really interesting. I go back and look at reviews from the 70s and the 60s and the 50s of certain things. And then
Hmm.
these reviewers and critics have reassessments and suddenly say something that they actually go back to 72 and Rolling Stone. They say, oh, this is terrible. And now they
Yeah.
say it's like iconic. I'm like, that's not what you wrote in 72. But that, like, and it's like, what is that? So like, I always show artists like, be wary because sometimes these guys revise what they do,
Hmm.
and so
And
it's you guys can't take it to heart.
yeah. And the thing is, like, so just like, but I accept that they're allowed to change their minds, right? They're allowed to evolve, and the world is allowed to evolve and change, and what is mainstream or what is acceptable and not acceptable. We're allowed to change our minds.
Mhm.
And that's why it really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, because it may not last. I mean, Van Gogh didn't even know that he was successful, that people were going to be like looking at his art all these years later and thinking that it was something so, like, he didn't know. Like, who was it?
William
Jimi
Blake either.
Hendrix.
William
Yeah.
Blake,
But Jimmy,
yeah,
like, I read
William
the
Blake, the
story.
Victorian, yeah.
Yeah. Jimi Hendrix, he died broke. Like he didn't know like that he was going to be this icon that we see Jimi Hendrix as today, but he was still out there doing his thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, he looked at some like Led Belly and Robert Johnson as like the real genius guitar players.
yeah.
He was looking toward like the original blues guys, like and they were from the Delta blues, and a lot of them he didn't think he was as authentic as they were. He had a lot of fear about his voice. I've read all kinds of things where he'd have curtains up when he was singing because he didn't have the
Mm,
confidence and wouldn't let people see him in the booth.
mm,
And he was like one of the greatest guitarists, and people around him did acknowledge that, but he didn't believe his voice was up to snuff with his playing. So he had this kind of internal issue where he
mm,
had like manic depression. And I read about it, and you're like, wow, this guy's like the best guitarist. Even today,
mhm.
people look at his playing, they can't match it. They can't even get anywhere close to it. And he had all these thoughts about him not being good enough. That
Isn't
if
that
you read
sad
about
though?
if you
For
read
me,
about
like that breaks my heart because I think like if I would have just sat him down and said, "Listen here, buddy," like, I'm kidding. But to me, it's so sad that somebody so talented with like so many gifts to share with the world, um, wasn't able to overcome that discomfort and of the self doubt. But I do believe that, if you have manic depression, like that's a chemical thing. Like you can't access reason. Like if you would have told me, 10 minutes after my husband died, is like, oh, things happen for a reason. He's in a better place. I probably would have punched you, right? I wasn't able to access
Mhm,
my reasoning part. Like my emotion, like my the chemicals in my brain were just like, I couldn't. But with
mhm,
time, I could access that thinking part of me that could walk myself through these challenges. But if you have a mental health disorder, you don't have that unless, like your literally your brain chemicals are bouncing in different ways and you don't have access to that little bit of reason that can pull you from there and say, "No, wait. I can decide what I believe about
mhm.
myself."
But that's when
So
you need to really, bring in, the right type of doctors or therapists to
exactly.
understand where you are. But sometimes, like,
Exactly.
you could have an issue where you're chemically like, you have a chemical imbalance or you have, like, a medical issue that's actually gonna prevent what like, the kinda conversational therapy that normally would work, but there's
Mhm.
another issue that you have to get beyond, and so it's not
Exactly.
always like one size fits all. Everybody's gotta kinda go down the path and figure out where they are, but it's just, finding out, people are scared, like, when I had cancer, it's like, I coulda said, "Well, I'm not gonna go to the doctor because 'cause I'm scared of the doctor."
Mm,
I knew there was something wrong. I felt there was something wrong, and I'm 27 and I'm like, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm 27." But I actually went,
mm,
and, I know people that didn't go, and they end up not having a good outcome because they just couldn't believe at that
mm.
age they could have something like that.
Yeah,
And, it's like you have to kinda be ready to listen to your body, to your heart, to your mind, and actually realize where you are.
yeah, for sure. Well, I'm very glad that you did listen and that you got the care that you needed to be here today.
Well, I think it's like same thing with the challenges that you kinda gotta understand, like, what is your tolerance for discomfort,
Mhm.
and then understand that things are not always to get to the next level, it's not always gonna be like, "Oh, it's easy." I think a lot of these people look up to thinking like they had an easy time.
Right.
It's not necessarily that it was easy. A lot of times it's very hard.
Yeah. There's this quote that I love, and it was, like, don't envy my progress without recognizing my sacrifice. Right? So don't look at somebody who's up there doing amazing things and think like what you just said that, oh, it was just easy for them or they were born into the right place at the right time or whatever. It's like they probably had, their own share of challenges and things that they had to overcome in order to be there. But I think the point is that we all have the power to do something about it, right? And that power lies with us. Oh, I'm frozen.
The overnight sensation is kind of over it's not it's presented and it's not exactly the truth. Most of the
Right.
time when you check out, there was a lot of work being done that you just didn't see.
Exactly. It's an overnight sensation, 20 years in the making kind of thing,
Yeah.
you know. So,
But I thank you for being on the podcast. It's very awesome to talk to somebody, and you challenged a lot of ideas I had, and I think it's always cool to learn because you don't know everything. That's the whole point is like you don't know things um you know about what's going on in the world until you actually talk to other people's perspectives. So some people can never hear something and
mhm,
then, I think that's one of the reasons I do the podcast is to get different points of view from people
mhm,
around the world, so that you can challenge your beliefs. You can challenge your concepts about what what you should be thinking, in terms of where your head's at. And it's always good to hear new ideas or the ideas you never heard before, and not just live in what your comfort zone. So thank you again for being on the show.
you're welcome. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Have a good night.
Thank you.